The alien princess trusted a human with her life, and the galaxy watched. From a distance, the planet seemed peaceful, its floating cities suspended like jewels over the endless oceans. But beneath the beauty of the royal capital, an invisible tension twisted through the halls of the palace. The Virelians, proud and meticulous, had kept their world safe and isolated for centuries. They prided themselves on intelligence, control, and a social order that never wavered. Yet today, something unexpected had entered their lives, a human. Ethan Cross had always been a traveler, drawn to the stars not by duty but by curiosity. He had not meant to step into royal affairs or face the weight of galactic eyes upon him. For Ethan, the universe was a puzzle, a series of systems and civilizations to explore, each with its own rules and surprises. He had landed on Zithera for a routine transport mission, unaware that destiny had already decided to put him in the path of Princess Liara, heir to a throne larger than he could have imagined. Liara moved through the grand corridors of the palace with a grace that seemed effortless. Her every gesture spoke of authority, yet behind her composed demeanor, she carried the unease of knowing enemies hid among friends. Rumors of political unrest had reached her ears, whispers that promised betrayal. Even in a society as orderly as the Virelians, secrets could fester like a hidden current, and one wrong move could bring chaos to the entire planet. She was cautious, aware that trust could be a dangerous luxury. Their first encounter happened unexpectedly. Ethan had been navigating the palace corridors with a map in hand, trying to find the landing bay where his ship awaited. He was used to charts, coordinates, and navigation systems, but the palace was unlike any place he had seen. Doors slid open at his approach, shadows shifted with subtle precision, and security patrols moved silently, always alert. He felt like a fish in a coral maze, unsure where to turn. Liara, meanwhile, had been inspecting a section of the palace less traveled, sensing that someone was moving with unusual intent. Her eyes, sharp and aware, caught the glint of a small object in the shadows. Before she could react fully, a hidden mechanism had activated, designed not to kill but to incapacitate anyone with malicious intent. It was a test, a trap meant for the intruder she suspected. But the mechanism misfired slightly, and the timing could have been disastrous. Ethan, moving with instinct rather than training, acted without hesitation. He intercepted the situation in a way that no Virelian would have anticipated. His hand on the panel, a quick calculation, and a small adjustment neutralized the mechanism just in time. Liara froze for a moment, recognizing that a human, fragile, unarmed, and seemingly ordinary, had prevented what could have been a dangerous mishap. She studied him carefully, noting his steady hands, the calm precision of his mind, and the courage that defied every expectation she held about humans. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice composed yet curious. She had expected questions, excuses, or perhaps fear. What she heard was neither. It was clarity, intelligence, and a hint of humor, subtle but present. "Ethan Cross," he said simply, holding out a hand, though he did not know whether the gesture would be received. "I think I just saved someone's day, not that I was planning to." Liara's eyes narrowed slightly, a gesture of intrigue rather than suspicion. Few beings had ever moved through her world without fear or awe, yet here was a human, confident yet unassuming. She allowed herself a small smile, a rare concession to the unpredictability of life. "You've saved more than a day," she said, her tone measured. "Perhaps more than you realize." From that moment, a silent understanding began to form between them. Ethan was not just a visitor. He was something unusual, something that the Virelians did not have. The ability to see problems differently, to act without rigid constraint, to trust instinct. Liara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps in him, she had found an ally who could navigate a world full of hidden threats in ways her own people could not. Yet the palace was full of watchful eyes. Advisors, guards, and even distant observers were already noting the unusual presence of a human in proximity to the princess. Some murmured in disapproval. Humans were considered primitive, unpredictable, and often naive. The idea that one could be trusted, much less recognized for intelligence and courage, challenged the very foundation of Virelian pride. Whispers spread quietly, a ripple of tension that might become a wave if it reached the wrong ears. Liara, however, chose to ignore the murmurs. She led Ethan through the palace, showing him the halls, the galleries filled with history, and the gardens that floated above crystalline waters. She explained not in great detail, but enough to let him understand the stakes. The Viorlians were a civilization built on precision and expectation, yet she recognized that rigid systems sometimes failed to account for creativity. Humans, she realized, might be the key to navigating such gaps. Ethan, for his part, absorbed every detail with fascination. He noted the technology, the artistry, and the meticulous design of everything he saw. He also noted the subtle tension in Liara's expression, the careful vigilance that suggested she carried a weight far heavier than her apparent poise. He did not fear it, nor did he feel the need to impress. Instead, he offered insight, suggestions, and occasionally a human perspective that was refreshingly direct. For instance, when discussing the security systems, he asked questions that no Viorlian advisor had considered, highlighting a simple flaw that had been overlooked for decades. Liara noted it quietly, impressed by his thinking. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a ceremonial delegate, a tall Viorlian with silver markings and a voice like polished stone. "Princess Liara," the delegate intoned, "you are expected in the council chamber." "There are developments that require your attention immediately." Liara's eyes flicked to Ethan. "Stay close," she said softly. "Things may become complicated." The council chamber was vast, circular, and designed to convey power. Every seat was occupied by a member of the court, each representing a different faction of Viorlian society. The air was thick with anticipation. Ethan could feel it, though he did not yet understand the politics in full. He simply knew that whatever happened next, it would require careful thought and steady nerves. As Liara entered, the room quieted. Eyes turned toward the princess, and then, subtly, toward the human beside her. Whispers circulated, a mix of astonishment, suspicion, and incredulity. Some could not believe that a human had accompanied the princess. Others began to speculate, silently questioning the judgment that allowed a human into such proximity to the royal heir. Liara, aware of every glance, walked confidently to her place, signaling Ethan to remain at her side. The message was clear. He was her trusted companion, for reasons that might remain invisible to the court but undeniable to her. The council convened, discussing issues of trade, diplomacy, and potential threats from neighboring systems. Liara listened carefully, interjecting with questions and insights. Ethan observed, noting patterns and inconsistencies. When one discussion turned to a strategic plan that seemed flawed, he suggested an alternative approach, not in challenge, but in the form of a question, asking what might happen under different circumstances. The room reacted with a mixture of surprise and irritation. No human had ever dared speak in such a forum, yet the logic of his reasoning could not be denied. Liara, silently proud, acknowledged him with a small nod. By the time the council adjourned, Ethan and Liara had formed a subtle bond. Trust had been built not in grand declarations, but in quiet moments of observation, instinct, and shared understanding. For Liara, the realization was profound. A human, so different, so unassuming, could act with precision, courage, and insight in ways that even the most skilled Viorlian could not. For Ethan, the experience was exhilarating. He had stumbled into a world of high stakes, alien intelligence, and intricate politics, yet he found purpose in being needed and in using his skills to protect someone whose life, and potentially the fate of a civilization, depended on him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace spires, Liara and Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing city. She spoke first, her voice calm but tinged with something deeper. "You've proven yourself today, Ethan. Not as a visitor, not as a curious traveler, but as someone I can trust." Ethan looked out at the floating lights of Zithra, feeling the weight of the moment. "I don't know if I can ever live up to that," he admitted, "but I'll do my best." Liara's smile was faint but genuine. "That is all I ask." Below them, the city pulsed with life, unaware that a human had already changed the course of history on Zithra. Somewhere in the galaxy, eyes would begin to watch, whispers would grow louder, and a story that no one could ignore was just beginning. And for the first time, a human had become a part of Viorlian destiny. The morning on Zithra began like a gentle tide, soft sunlight reflecting off the floating gardens and glass towers. From above, the city looked serene, yet inside the palace, tension hummed quietly, like the whisper of wind through the spires. Princess Liara moved through the corridors with careful grace. aware of every gaze and every word that might hide more than it revealed. Beside her, Ethan Cross walked with a quiet confidence that surprised many of the palace guards. He had adapted quickly to the rhythm of Zithara, learning the pace, the expectations, and even the subtle gestures that communicated authority without words. Their first morning together had already set the tone for an unusual partnership. Liara had come to rely on his perspective, though she did not reveal it openly. Some advisors still questioned the presence of a human so close to the princess, but Liara ignored their murmurs. She had made her decision. Ethan was not only trustworthy but valuable in ways few could comprehend. "Do you always move this cautiously?" Ethan asked softly, his eyes scanning the hallway. He noticed a door slightly ajar, a shadow that seemed out of place. "Even when it's not necessary?" Liara glanced at him with a slight smile. "Caution is not a habit, it is a shield," she replied, "and sometimes it is the only thing keeping us alive." Ethan nodded. For someone who had traveled countless star systems, seen the unpredictable chaos of space travel, he understood her point. Some risks were not visible until they arrived, like currents beneath calm water. Their morning routine was interrupted by a message from the council chamber. Liara's personal communicator chimed with a soft tone, and the holographic display showed the concerned face of one of her most trusted advisors. "Princess," the advisor began, his voice steady but carrying a note of worry, "reports have come in from neighboring systems. There are signs of unrest, and some factions have begun to question the security of the throne. We must prepare for possible challenges to your leadership." Liara's expression remained calm. She did not flinch at the words. "Thank you for the update. Prepare the council for a meeting. I want all details, including any irregularities in the surveillance logs." She turned to Ethan, her gaze steady. "I want you to accompany me. Your perspective may be different, but it could be useful." Ethan's brow rose slightly. "Different how?" he asked, curious rather than cautious. "Humans see patterns where others see rules," Liara said simply. "Your insights may reveal what my advisors overlook." As they entered the council chamber, the air was thick with anticipation. The assembly of Virelian leaders was unusually tense, their voices restrained as they discussed the latest reports. Some factions expressed concern about outsiders, others emphasized loyalty and tradition. Ethan observed quietly, noting subtle shifts in posture, the careful avoidance of direct eye contact, and the hidden messages conveyed through tone rather than words. When a discussion began about potential threats to Liara's position, Ethan raised a simple question. "Have you considered that the unrest might not be from outside the system, but within?" His voice was calm, unassuming, yet carried a directness that made the council pause. The chamber fell silent. Humans rarely spoke in such forums, and when they did, their words were often ignored. But Ethan's reasoning had weight. Liara leaned slightly toward him, encouraging without drawing attention. "Explain," she said softly. Ethan continued, pointing to patterns he had noticed from the reports. "Some communications seem normal on the surface, but the timing and frequency suggest coordination. If these factions are trying to appear loyal while acting against the throne, the signals might be deliberately subtle. I believe someone is testing your response, seeing how you handle pressure before acting openly." The council exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded slowly, acknowledging the validity of his logic. Others frowned, hesitant to accept insight from a human. Liara observed quietly, appreciating the subtle courage it took for him to speak, and the clarity of thought that distinguished him from even the most skilled Virelian analysts. After a long discussion, Liara adjourned the council. She led Ethan to a quieter chamber, one filled with light and the soft hum of the city below. "You've done well," she said, her tone both serious and approving. "You see what others cannot." Ethan shrugged lightly. "I just notice things. I don't always understand the politics behind them." Liara smiled faintly. "Understanding is not always necessary. Action and insight can be enough." The next days were a delicate dance of observation and quiet strategy. Liara and Ethan moved through the palace and the city visiting areas often overlooked by the court. Ethan's presence drew curious glances from citizens and officials alike, yet he remained composed. He asked questions, offered simple suggestions, and noticed details that even the Virelian advisors missed. One afternoon, they walked through the palace gardens, where floating blossoms reflected the sunlight in a cascade of colors. Liara paused to observe the petals, her mind focused yet open to the world around her. "Humans are strange," she said after a moment. "You see value in things we consider insignificant, a pattern in the petals, a sound in the wind. And yet you often discover truths that our complex systems overlook." Ethan grinned. "Maybe it's because we have to. We don't have centuries of tradition to guide us. We have to rely on what we see, what we feel, what makes sense." Liara considered this. "Perhaps that is why I trust you." Her gaze held his for a moment, serious yet unassuming. "Your perspective is rare here." Ethan felt a small thrill of pride. It was not the kind of recognition he sought in the ordinary universe. This was different. Here, his ideas mattered and they could shape the course of events. But trust, no matter how carefully built, always drew attention. The whispers in the palace grew louder, subtle but persistent. Some members of the court began to question Liara's judgment, uneasy with the presence of a human in decisions that affected the entire planet. Ethan noticed the tension, but he did not flinch. He had faced uncertainty before, and he knew that careful observation and quiet reasoning could often prevent disasters before they arose. One evening, as the twin suns set and cast long shadows across the city, Liara and Ethan observed activity in a neighboring district. There were unusual gatherings, groups of individuals moving with purpose but careful not to attract notice. Ethan tilted his head, analyzing the movements. "They're organized," he said quietly, "but they're not attacking yet. They're testing boundaries, seeing how the system reacts." Liara nodded. "We must be prepared, but not in ways they expect." Over the next several days, Ethan helped Liara devise subtle measures to monitor and anticipate these movements. They used a combination of Virelian technology and human ingenuity, adapting systems in ways the advisors had not considered. Ethan suggested modifications to communication protocols, ways to detect patterns in behavior, and simple but effective strategies to safeguard key areas without raising alarm. Each suggestion was met with initial skepticism, yet when tested, they proved remarkably effective. The palace slowly came to respect the unusual partnership, though some grudgingly. Humans, they realized, were not entirely predictable, but that unpredictability could be a strength. Liara's trust in Ethan became evident to all. She did not hide it. At public events, he remained by her side, quietly observing, sometimes interjecting with insights that helped avoid complications. One afternoon, as they walked through a floating promenade filled with citizens and dignitaries, a minor disruption occurred. A malfunction in one of the transport systems caused a brief delay, and a crowd began to gather, growing restless. Liara remained calm, but she noticed the tension rising. Ethan, without hesitation, stepped forward and offered simple solutions, guiding people safely and efficiently. The crowd responded, some with surprise that a human had such composure. Others whispered among themselves, acknowledging the unusual competence of this outsider. Liara observed him closely. "You have a way of calming situations," she said later. "It is not a skill we often see in this city." Ethan shrugged. "Humans deal with chaos all the time. It's part of the job," she laughed softly. "Then perhaps that is why I rely on you. You bring clarity where others see only rules." As the days passed, the bond between Liara and Ethan deepened. They shared meals in quiet chambers, walked the floating gardens, and discussed ideas not only about politics but about the universe itself. Ethan told her of distant worlds, of human ingenuity in survival and exploration, of the value of seeing possibilities rather than following rigid codes. Liara, in turn, shared stories of Virelian history, their achievements, and the burdens of leadership. In these moments, trust grew not from necessity but from understanding. Yet the undercurrents of suspicion never fully disappeared. The palace remained a place where whispers could ripple into storms, where small missteps might be exploited. Liara knew that enemies, both subtle and overt, would test her and her human ally. But she also understood that Ethan's perspective offered her an advantage no Virelian advisor could provide. Together, they formed a team, an unexpected alliance that quietly began to shift the balance of influence in the palace. One evening, as the twin moons rose over Zithra, casting silver light across the spires, Liara and Ethan stood at the palace balcony. The city below sparkled with life, unaware of the quiet preparations taking place to secure the princess's future. "You have changed the way I see things," Liara said softly. Not only what is possible, but what is necessary. Ethan looked at her, realizing the weight of her words. I've only done what I thought made sense, he said humbly, but if it helps, I'll continue. She smiled faintly. You will, won't you, because I trust you? Ethan nodded. Always. Below, the city hummed with life. Above, the stars waited patiently, as if watching the rise of something unexpected. An alliance between human intuition and alien tradition, a quiet revolution of thought and courage. The galaxy, though far away, seemed ready to take notice. And in the palace of Zithra, two beings, one Virelian, one human, prepared to navigate the challenges that would test not only their trust but the very future of the planet. The days on Zithra had grown tense, though the city continued to shimmer with beauty as if unaware of the quiet storm brewing beneath its surface. Princess Liara moved with steady grace, but even she could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing against the palace walls. Factions that had once whispered in shadows were now testing boundaries, sending subtle messages through couriers, coded signals, and carefully chosen words. Liara had come to rely on Ethan's perspective more than ever. While Virelian saw only rules, hierarchies, and patterns of tradition, Ethan saw possibilities, gaps, and opportunities to anticipate moves that others could not. One morning, Liara summoned Ethan to a private observation chamber high above the city. The room was filled with holographic displays, charts, and images showing the movements of citizens, trade ships, and communication networks. Ethan studied them with quiet focus, his human eyes catching patterns that even the Virelian analysts had missed. Look here, Ethan said, pointing to a cluster of movements near the northern transport hub. It's subtle, but the timing and routes suggest coordination. These aren't random errors, they're deliberate tests. Liara nodded. I suspected as much. I have been following them, but their intentions are difficult to prove. They operate within the limits of our rules, so no one can openly accuse them without evidence. That's why I think we can't respond as they expect, Ethan suggested. We need to observe carefully, gather information quietly, and guide the situation in a way that exposes them without confrontation. Liara considered his advice. A delicate balance, she said softly. You may have underestimated the subtlety required in human politics, but I see that your mind is well suited for this task. The next few days were filled with quiet investigation. Ethan and Liara moved through the city under the guise of routine activities, observing, questioning, and piecing together the patterns of those who sought to challenge the throne. Ethan's methods were unorthodox. He noted small inconsistencies in reports, analyzed seemingly meaningless interactions, and even used simple distractions to observe reactions without raising suspicion. Liara admired his ingenuity. It was a skill few Virelians possessed, the ability to think creatively under pressure, unbound by tradition yet fully aware of consequences. One afternoon, while reviewing communications in a secluded chamber, Ethan noticed a pattern that made him pause. Liara, these messages, they're meant to test your reaction, he said quietly. Not only to your personal decisions, but also to how your advisors respond. Whoever is behind this is looking for weaknesses, not just in you, but in the system. Liara leaned closer to examine the data. Her expression was thoughtful, her sharp eyes noting subtleties that confirmed Ethan's insight. You're right, she said. They are probing every aspect of our response. If we misstep, they could manipulate it to their advantage. Ethan nodded. So we need to create a situation where they reveal themselves without putting anyone at risk, something subtle yet revealing. Liara's eyes sparkled with appreciation. And you have a plan, he smiled faintly. Always. Over the next several days, they carefully orchestrated their approach. They adjusted schedules, subtly modified communication protocols, and arranged small diversions that would encourage the conspirators to act in ways that could be traced and observed. All the while, they maintained the appearance of normalcy, allowing the court to continue functioning as if nothing unusual were happening. Ethan's unassuming manner proved to be an asset. The conspirators, confident that a human could not influence the situation, underestimated his presence. Liara's trust in him allowed him freedom to act with precision, offering suggestions, observing reactions, and noting every detail that could provide a clue. Their partnership became a quiet force, unseen by most, but shaping events with careful thought and strategy. One evening, Liara and Ethan moved through a less traveled section of the palace, reviewing logs and patterns of activity. The corridors were empty, save for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional flicker of light from the floating gardens outside. "They are growing bolder," Ethan said. "Their signals are more frequent, their movements more coordinated." But they still underestimate the human element. They believe chaos cannot be anticipated by someone like me. Liara smiled faintly. "Then they are mistaken. You have seen what others cannot. That is your advantage." They worked late into the night, analyzing data and planning their next moves. The palace, normally serene at this hour, seemed charged with quiet energy, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Ethan's insights continued to reveal unexpected patterns. He noticed a courier who appeared in multiple locations in ways that did not align with official schedules. He observed subtle interactions among advisors that hinted at unspoken alliances. And he traced signals that suggested the existence of hidden communications channels deliberately designed to evade detection. Liara was impressed. "Your observations are invaluable," she said. "Even the most experienced Virelians would have overlooked these details." Ethan shrugged. "It's what humans do. We look at the parts, the small details, and find connections others assume don't exist. Sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective." The following morning, they implemented a subtle test to confirm their suspicions. They allowed a minor piece of information to circulate through the palace channels, carefully crafted to provoke a response from the conspirators. Then they observed, taking careful note of reactions, timing, and patterns. It did not take long. A faction within the council began to act in ways that revealed their intentions. They miscommunicated, sent couriers unnecessarily, and created small inconsistencies in reports, all of which Ethan and Liara documented. The evidence, once subtle, became undeniable. "This confirms it," Ethan said quietly, his eyes scanning the logs. "They are testing, probing, and preparing, but now we know who they are and how they think. We have the advantage." Liara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And we will use it carefully. Not to punish, but to prevent disruption, to ensure that our city and our people remain safe." Over the next few days, Liara and Ethan devised a strategy that was both clever and safe. They prepared subtle interventions that would expose the conspirators' intentions without creating public alarm or risk. They adjusted schedules, guided communications, and created scenarios that would reveal loyalty or betrayal naturally. Ethan's human perspective continued to be invaluable. He suggested ways to observe without interference, to encourage patterns without confrontation, and to anticipate reactions in ways that the Virelians, with all their intelligence, had overlooked. Finally, the moment arrived. During a routine council session, the conspirators acted, attempting to manipulate information and influence decisions. But thanks to Ethan and Liara's preparations, every move was documented, every signal traced, and every subtle action observed. When the session concluded, the evidence was clear. Liara addressed the council with calm authority. "We have observed irregularities," she said, her voice steady. "The evidence will guide our decisions. We must consider loyalty, intention, and the impact on our city and our people. This is not about punishment, but about responsibility." The conspirators realized their efforts had failed. They had underestimated both the princess and the human who had become her trusted ally. The room was filled with quiet tension, the kind that comes from recognition that plans have been anticipated, and that intelligence has prevailed without confrontation. After the session, Liara and Ethan returned to a quiet balcony, overlooking the city as the twin suns set. The light reflected off the glass towers, casting golden patterns across the floating gardens. "You've done it," Liara said softly. "You've seen what others could not and guided us to clarity without chaos." Ethan shook his head slightly. "I didn't do it alone. You saw what needed to be done and trusted me to act. That made the difference." Liara smiled faintly. "Trust is rare but necessary, and sometimes the right ally is not the one everyone expects." Below, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of how close it had come to disruption and how carefully the danger had been managed. The citizens moved through markets, gardens, and transport hubs, oblivious to the delicate orchestration that kept their lives steady. Ethan and Liara stood in silence, appreciating the quiet triumph. It was not celebrated with fanfare or applause, but it was real. It was a success born from intelligence, observation, and the courage to act differently from the expected. "Do you ever tire of this?" Ethan asked, watching the reflections in the water below. "Of what?" Liara asked. "Of always being careful, of always anticipating threats." Liara considered the question. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "but responsibility does not allow for rest. And when the right ally stands beside you, the burden becomes lighter." Ethan nodded. "Then I'll stay, as long as you need me." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "I do. And the galaxy will notice in time that the human who walked beside the Princess of Zithra was more than a visitor. He was a force for clarity, trust, and ingenuity." The twin moons rose high over the palace, bathing the city in silver light. For a moment, the world seemed suspended between tension and calm, between uncertainty and resolution. Liara and Ethan understood that their journey was not complete. Challenges would continue, whispers would persist, and the city's future would always require vigilance. But they also knew that, together, they could navigate the complexity of power, politics, and possibility. And somewhere beyond Zithra, in the vastness of space, watchers would begin to notice. Not only the princess, but the human who had become her trusted companion, whose insight, courage, and perspective had quietly altered the balance of power. The story of a human and an alien princess, once unlikely, was growing into something larger, a story that might shape the galaxy itself. As the night deepened, they remained on the balcony, observing the city and reflecting on the delicate victories of the past days. The quiet triumph, earned without conflict or violence, felt profound. Ethan realized that human ingenuity was not just about tools or technology. It was about perception, trust, and understanding. Liara understood that leadership was strengthened not by rigid control, but by alliances that saw beyond fear and tradition. Together, they prepared for the challenges yet to come, knowing that the next steps would test their trust, their creativity, and the quiet strength that had already carried them this far. The galaxy was watching, and they were ready. The morning air on Zithra carried a soft warmth as the twin suns rose over the city. Princess Liara stood on the balcony of the palace, her eyes scanning the horizon where floating gardens met glass towers. The city appeared peaceful, unaware of the careful preparations unfolding within the palace walls. Beside her, Ethan Cross observed the morning bustle, noting subtle movements and exchanges among the citizens and palace staff. "You seem calm," Ethan said, breaking the quiet. Liara's expression was serene but focused. "Calm enough," she replied. "The city may seem unaware, but today every action matters. The conspirators will reveal themselves soon." Ethan nodded. Over the past weeks, they had gathered evidence, observed patterns, and prepared strategies that would expose those who had sought to destabilize the throne. The work had been subtle, careful, and deliberate. No one outside their circle yet knew the full scope, but the signs were clear. The factions that had whispered in shadows were growing impatient, and their next moves would either confirm loyalty or betray intention. The palace halls were alive with quiet activity. Advisors moved with purpose, guards maintained their positions, and couriers delivered messages with unassuming efficiency. Ethan and Liara walked together, their footsteps soft on the polished floors, reviewing the final steps of their plan. "Our approach has to be precise," Ethan said. "If we force confrontation, they may retreat or hide. We need them to act naturally so their intentions become undeniable." Liara nodded. "We will give them the stage, and their own choices will reveal the truth." As the council convened later that morning, the conspirators entered with confident faces, unaware that every move had been anticipated. Liara took her place at the center, her presence commanding yet composed. Ethan remained close, observing quietly, ready to provide insights if necessary. The session began with discussions of trade, diplomacy, and city management, but carefully embedded within the topics were tests designed by Liara and Ethan. Information was introduced, small decisions were suggested, and seemingly routine requests were made. All of these were subtle prompts, intended to provoke responses from those who had been manipulating events in secret. As the meeting progressed, the conspirators began to act in ways that betrayed their intentions. A council member attempted to reroute resources for personal advantage. Another misrepresented information in a report, and subtle alliances became visible through careful observation. Ethan noted each move, documenting the evidence in ways that would make it undeniable without accusation or confrontation. Liara observed closely, her calm demeanor never faltering. "The patterns are clear," she whispered to Ethan. "Their actions confirm what we suspected." "They cannot hide it now," Ethan nodded silently. "It's exactly as we planned. Their choices are their own undoing." By mid-morning, the session reached a point where the conspirators' intentions were fully revealed. Liara addressed the council with composed authority. "We have observed behaviors that compromise the stability of our city and our leadership," she said. "The evidence is clear. Those responsible have acted against the interests of our people. This is not punishment, but a necessary measure to ensure loyalty, responsibility, and transparency." The council members shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their careful schemes had been anticipated. The human presence beside the princess, once questioned, was now recognized as crucial to the clarity that had brought the truth to light. Ethan's insights had provided perspectives that even the most skilled Virelian advisors could not have anticipated. A quiet wave of respect spread through the room. Some council members exchanged glances, acknowledging that the human who had walked alongside the princess had proven intelligence, courage, and insight beyond expectation. The conspirators, though composed, understood that their influence had been neutralized not by force, but by careful observation, strategy, and understanding. After the session, Liara and Ethan moved to a quieter chamber, overlooking the city as the afternoon light reflected off the towers. "It is done," Liara said softly. "The city is secure, and the conspirators have no choice but to accept accountability." Ethan smiled faintly. "And without anyone getting hurt," Liara nodded. "Their actions were revealed by their own choices. That is the power of insight, preparation, and trust." They spent the rest of the day reviewing the evidence, ensuring that records were complete, and confirming that every aspect of their plan had succeeded. The palace, while bustling, maintained a calm atmosphere, reflecting the quiet triumph of careful strategy. That evening, Liara summoned a public assembly. Citizens, officials, and visiting dignitaries gathered in the central plaza, unaware of the full scope of the events that had transpired. Liara stepped forward, her presence commanding attention, while Ethan remained at her side, a quiet symbol of the alliance that had guided the city through uncertainty. "People of Zithara," Liara began, her voice steady and clear, "recent events have tested our leadership, our city, and our loyalty to one another. We have observed challenges, subtle and deliberate, that sought to destabilize our unity. These challenges have been met, not with force or fear, but with careful thought, vigilance, and collaboration." The crowd listened, captivated by her calm authority. "We have learned that trust is essential, that insight and courage come in many forms, and that the strength of our city lies not only in tradition, but in the ability to adapt, to understand, and to act with wisdom. In this, I have been fortunate to have an ally whose perspective has been invaluable." Ethan stepped forward slightly, though Liara's words directed all focus on the message rather than him personally. "Humans, like all beings, see the world differently," Liara continued. "This difference can be a strength when combined with wisdom, care, and responsibility. Today, we recognize the contributions of those who guide us through unseen challenges, regardless of origin." The crowd responded with quiet acknowledgement, some nodding in respect, others murmuring approval. The message was clear. Loyalty, insight, and cooperation were valued above prejudice or preconceived notions. The galaxy beyond would take notice of this unusual acknowledgement. A human celebrated for contributions that shaped the course of an alien society without domination, violence, or coercion. After the assembly, Liara and Ethan returned to the palace, walking through the quiet corridors where shadows danced in the soft glow of the twin moons. "The city seems lighter," Ethan said, observing the calm faces of staff and citizens. Liara smiled faintly. "It is. Order has been preserved, trust has been strengthened, and the future remains bright because we acted with care rather than fear." Ethan nodded. "And we did it together. That's something I've never experienced before." Liara looked at him, her expression both serious and warm. "Trust is rare, Ethan, but when it is given and respected, it can change everything." Over the following days, the ripple effects of their success became evident. Advisors and council members adjusted their behavior, guided by the clarity revealed in recent events. Citizens, unaware of the full extent of the intrigue, felt a subtle reassurance in the competence and fairness displayed by the princess. Rumors of a human's role began to circulate quietly, not as gossip, but as admiration. Far from home, across distant systems, observers would eventually hear of the human who had walked beside the Princess of Zithra, whose ingenuity, insight, and calm courage had helped preserve stability without conflict. Ethan and Liara spent time in quieter moments as well. They walked the floating gardens, discussed distant worlds, and shared perspectives on leadership, life, and trust. Liara found value not only in Ethan's insight, but also in his ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. Ethan understood the power of observation, patience, and human creativity in shaping outcomes without force. One evening, as the twin moons rose high over the city, Liara spoke softly. "You have changed more than the course of recent events, Ethan. You have shown the city and perhaps the galaxy that courage, insight, and ingenuity matter regardless of origin." Ethan smiled, looking at the glowing reflections in the waters below. "I only did what made sense, but it feels good to know it mattered." Liara nodded. "It mattered more than you realize, and the galaxy will notice in time that humans are not only observers but participants in shaping destiny." In the following weeks, Liara introduced subtle reforms inspired by the lessons they had learned. Systems were adjusted to encourage transparency, communication channels were improved, and the city embraced a new balance of tradition and insight. Ethan's human perspective remained valued, not as an outsider but as a trusted partner, proving that trust and understanding could transcend difference. As the sun rose on another day, Liara and Ethan stood on the palace balcony, overlooking a city alive with possibility. "What comes next?" Ethan asked, gazing at the floating towers and gardens. "Whatever challenges arrive," Liara said calmly, "we face them with insight, patience, and the courage to act wisely, together." The city below sparkled in the sunlight, reflecting the quiet triumph of careful strategy, trust, and collaboration. Beyond Zithra, in the vastness of space, observers would take note of the unusual alliance between a human and an alien princess, whose partnership had quietly reshaped the course of a civilization. And somewhere in the galaxy, the story would spread. The tale of a human who walked beside a princess, whose insight and courage preserved peace, inspired trust, and proved that even the most unlikely allies could change the fate of worlds. As the twin suns rose higher, Liara and Ethan remained on the balcony, looking toward the horizon. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and possibilities, yet they knew one truth. Together, they had proven that courage, ingenuity, and trust could shape the course of history without violence, without fear, and without compromise of principle. The galaxy watched, and humanity had earned its place not through domination, but through wisdom, heart, and unwavering courage. The alien princess trusted a human with her life, and the galaxy watched.